Story 1. My name is Jack, and I worked as a security guard at a large hotel in Chicago during my late 20s. It paid way better than pretty much any other job nearby that I was actually qualified for. But the most annoying part about it was the scheduling and the staff at the time. The building was having trouble with a lack of staff to cover shifts, so my schedule would be mornings, evenings or overnights, all randomly throughout the week. It made it really hard to even sleep sometimes, but again, I liked the money. Anyway, I was working a late evening shift this night and was at the front desk talking to two of my co-workers, Mike and Amy. It was around 11 p.m. and my shift ended at midnight, so we were just passing the time chatting. In the middle of our conversation, the phone rang on the desk that I was leaning on. Checking the number, it was from one of the rooms in the hotel, so I picked it up and asked how I could help them. A man spoke in a hushed, frantic tone, saying that there was something really strange going on in one of the rooms down the hall and that he was worried about it. I asked him to clarify what exactly he meant. He responded telling me to come up quick because it sounded like someone was in serious danger and he was getting really freaked out. I checked the room number on the phone, wrote it down, and told him I would send security up as soon as possible. Of course, I was just referring to myself since I was the only guard on duty. When I put the phone down, I quickly explained the weird nature of the call to Mike and Emmy, then headed to the elevators and went up to the 5th floor where the room was located. Walking down the quiet hallway, there was a strange sense of silence. I expected to hear whatever the caller was talking about, but there were no noises coming from any of the rooms. I also thought the caller might be waiting by the door for me, but when I arrived, the door to room 512 was closed. I knocked loudly, announcing it was hotel security. I didn't hear any movement or sounds from inside at all. After a minute with no answer, I walked down to the end of the hallway, listening intently for anything unusual. Hearing nothing, I continued back and knocked on 512 again, calling out my presence. A few moments later, the room behind me, 513, opened, and an older woman asked if I was security. I said yes, and asked if she knew anything about a strange noise or the caller from 512. She replied that she had heard some loud banging traveling through the hallway walls a few minutes ago, but was unsure what it was. From her voice and facial expression, she seemed really freaked out. At this point, I was starting to get nervous too. I grabbed my walkie and radioed down to the front desk, asking them to try calling 512 again to see if anyone answered. After a little bit, they replied that the line just rang with no answer. I stood there for a moment, trying to think what to do next, before redialing the desk again. I told Emmy to look up who 513 was registered to for the night. After waiting forever, she got back saying there was no guest booked in that room. Now, I was even more confused. I took out my master key card and opened the door since supposedly no one should be inside. The room looked clean and unused, as far as I could tell. I searched every corner, closet and bathroom, but found nothing out of place. However, I did notice the room phone was off the hook. I picked it up and turned it over to get the serial number, then went back down to the lobby desk and checked the security records for timestamps of calls made from that room. Sure enough, there was a record of an active call to the front desk around 15 minutes ago, the one I had answered about the disturbance. Obviously, the hotel didn't record conversations, so all I could confirm was that someone had been inside the vacant room without permission and used the phone. This ended up becoming a bigger investigation over the next few days. The next morning, his wife reported the disappearance of a guest living in room 514. All the security footage was reviewed, and the missing man was last seen leaving the hotel alone around 1 a.m., a couple hours after the mystery call I received. It's still unclear if the two incidents are connected, but it seemed like too much of a coincidence. I don't know how the caller got into 513 or who they were, but their brief description of what they heard makes me think the missing guest was maybe kidnapped or worse. Unfortunately, the person who made the call has never been identified, and as of today, the man has still not been found. Over the years, I've thought back to that night many times, running through the details over and over, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wonders if I had reacted faster or called the police right away, if the outcome would have been different. It's possible the disturbance the neighbor heard was the man being taken against his will. And maybe that call to the front desk was someone trying to get help, but feeling too scared to give their real identity. I guess I'll never know for sure, but it still haunts me. Story 2. This happened to me during a business trip that I took last fall for work. I arrived at the hotel in a small town and picked up my key for the room which my company had booked. It was a nice-looking place on the inside, though a bit smaller than most hotels. Maybe 30 or 40 rooms total, and only 3 stories high. My room was on the top floor, so I took the elevator up and started making my way down the long hallway, looking for room 306. I found it at the very end, set my bags down and reached into my pocket for the key card. But just as I did that, the door to the room next to mine opens and a man steps out into the hall. He was maybe in his 40s, average height, wearing jeans and a brown leather jacket. He greeted me with a friendly voice, mentioning he was my neighbor for the night, and held his hand out for a handshake. I shook it hesitantly and told him my name, then quickly slid my key card into the door. As I walked inside, I noticed from the corner of my eye that he had gone back into his room and shut the door. I thought it was a little strange that he had come out just to greet me, but figured some people are just overly friendly. I unpacked my small suitcase and duffel bag, then laid down on the bed and turned on the TV. It was already after 10 p.m, and I was exhausted from traveling all day, so I planned on just watching something for a bit before going to sleep early. After about 20 minutes, I took a quick shower and got ready for bed. I turned off all the lights and laid there with my eyes closed, trying to fall asleep. But after almost 15 minutes of tossing and turning, I was still wide awake. Suddenly, I heard a creaking sound as the door to the room next to mine opened, followed by the shuffling of footsteps as someone walked by. They paused right outside my door for a second before continuing down the hall. Through the sliver of light peeking under the door, I could see their shadow linger there for a moment. This creeped me out, so I got up and double-checked that the door was locked and latched. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid and finally managed to drift off to sleep. The next morning, I got ready and headed out to meet my co-workers at a company office where we had training sessions and dinner. I didn't get back to the hotel until after 10 p.m. again, and I was exhausted. I carelessly tossed my work bag onto the bed and got in the shower to rinse off. About 10 minutes in, over the noise of the water, I suddenly heard the distinct electronic beep of the door lock disengaging. My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew it had to be too late for housekeeping services. My mind instantly went to the strange man next door, though I had no idea how he could have a keycard to my specific room. I stood there paralyzed, listening to the door slowly creak open. Soft footsteps entered, and then the door clicked shut again. They slowly walked past the bathroom entrance. With the shower running, they had to have known I was inside. Trying not to make any noise, I turned off the water and cautiously stepped out, quickly throwing on the sweatpants I had left on the floor. I crept over to press my ear against the door. I could hear the faint rustling of someone digging through my bags. Of course I wanted to confront them, but for all I knew, they could be armed. In that moment, I felt completely helpless and frozen in fear. I had no idea what this person wanted or what they were capable of. Soon, the room went silent. With my phone still on the nightstand, I realized my best bet was to call for help to scare them off. I took a deep breath and then started pounding on the door, screaming at the top of my lungs. I heard frantic footsteps run past, followed by the room door flung open and then slammed shut again. Waiting a few seconds, I ripped open the bathroom door and ran to lock the entrance behind them. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Once police were on their way, I'd also called the front desk to report the break-in. Of course, by the time officers arrived, the intruder was long gone without a trace. Thankfully, after reviewing security footage, police were able to identify and apprehend the man from the room next to mine, as he was attempting to leave the hotel parking lot. I later found out he did have a master key card stolen from housekeeping, though his motive still remains unclear. He refused to speak during questioning. No charges could be filed since nothing was provably taken or damaged. But I know in my gut he was not there with innocent intentions. The fact that he came into the room while I was showering makes me believe he planned to kidnap or even kill me. We'll never know for sure, but it haunts me thinking what could have happened if I hadn't acted quickly that night. I'll certainly be more cautious staying alone in hotels from now on. Story 3. My family would take yearly summer vacations to a different hotel and resort each time. It would always be me, my wife Jenny, and our 2 boys, Tyler, who was 8, and Jacob, who was 6. For the most part, we would spend our time relaxing at the resort itself, rather than going out to visit other places. It made it cheaper since we didn't need to rent a car, and it was nice to just enjoy the amenities and get away from everyday life. When we first arrived in the morning, we'd unpack and the kids would immediately want to go to the water park. Jenny and I would sit in lounges around the pool while the boys went off and played with the other kids. We'd sit there enjoying the sun for a few hours before heading back to the room to get cleaned up for dinner. On this particular vacation, after being at the water park for about 2 hours, I got up and started walking around looking for the kids so we could leave. After a few minutes, I found Tyler and asked him where Jacob was. He said Jacob was playing with another boy on the other side of the park. I told Tyler to head back to Mom while I went to find Jacob. I was searching around for probably 10 minutes, starting to get worried when I finally spotted him. He was in a back corner sitting in some chairs and talking to another young boy who looked around his age. Sitting next to them was a couple who I assumed were the other boy's parents. I walked up and briefly introduced myself, but they didn't really respond other than giving me a polite smile. After an awkward moment, I told Jacob it was time to leave for dinner. I led him away and asked about his new friend. Jacob just said they were playing together, but didn't know much else about him. Then Jacob told me something strange. He said the boy had introduced him to his parents, and they invited Jacob to have dinner with them tonight. I found it very odd and concerning that these people would invite someone else's child to dinner without even talking to me or Jenny first. When we got back to the room, I told Jenny what happened, and she was also worried. We decided to just go somewhere quick for dinner and got back to the hotel around 5 p.m. The kids seemed exhausted, so we were ready to just relax for the evening. As we got off on our floor, the elevator doors opened, and there was the boy Jacob was playing with along with his mother, standing as if waiting for us. The mother immediately looked at me with a fake smile and asked if Jacob could join them for dinner tonight. I glanced at Jenny, knowing we were both freaked out. I stammered that we had already eaten, but maybe another time. The woman's smile faded, and she turned to walk away without another word. When we got into our room, Jenny and I pulled Jacob aside and strictly told him he was not allowed to go near that family without one of us with him. He was upset but agreed. I also talked to Tyler separately, telling him to keep an eye on his little brother. We took turns showering and then relaxed for the night. I was annoyed that I already had to be so on edge about my kids' safety, but hoped the next day would be better. Eventually, we all turned in for bed. A few hours later, I was woken up by Tyler shaking my arm. He whispered that Jacob was talking to someone at the door. I jumped up to see Jacob trying to unlock it as I heard a voice on the other side. I sprinted over, yelling at him to get away from the door. Jacob jumped back, startled by me. I ripped the door open, but only caught a glimpse of a man's figure running down the hall. In a rage, I chased after him, but by the time I got to the elevators, he was gone. I ran back to the room where Jenny had locked the door. I told her I was going to the lobby to report this while she stayed with the boys. By the time I explained it all to the night manager, I had calmed down a bit, but was still shaken up. Unfortunately, they said there wasn't much they could do without proof of which guest it was. No cameras in the halls, and I hadn't gotten a look at the man's face. Obviously, I assumed it was the creepy kid's dad, but couldn't prove their motive. The best they would do was refund our remaining nights so we could move hotels. It was an awful, powerless feeling knowing someone likely trying to abduct Jacob and yet nothing could be done to stop them. Those evil people are probably still out there preying on more innocent kids. What haunts me most is wondering about the boy Jacob befriended. Could he have been a previous kidnapped child they'd now used to lure in more victims? The thought of what sinister fate could have awaited my sweet boy if I hadn't woken up in time makes me sick. Parents, please be cautious of overly friendly strangers and trust your instincts if a situation feels wrong. Monsters are real and could be closer than you think.